He walked into the shelter and didn't ask for a puppy. He didn't care about breed, age, or color. Instead, he said 6 words that froze the entire room. "I want your most unloved dog." What happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was life-changing. From a forgotten corner of the shelter to the center of a town's greatest rescue, this is the story of a dog no one believed in, until one man looked a little closer. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The soft ring of a bell echoed through the small animal shelter as the front door swung open. Lena, the receptionist, looked up from her desk with a warm smile. She was used to seeing families with kids tugging on their parents' arms, couples, holding hands, or excited teenagers asking, "What puppies do you have today?" But today was different. The man who stepped inside was alone. He looked to be in his late 40s, worn-out boots, faded jeans, a calm face, but eyes that had seen a lot. He nodded politely and walked up to the desk. "I'd like to adopt your most unloved dog," he said. Lena blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "The one no one wants," he said again, his voice steady. "The one that's been here the longest. The dog no one asks about." For a moment, the room felt unusually still. Even the dogs, who usually barked non-stop, seemed quieter. Lena studied him. Most people asked about size, age, or if the dog was good with kids. This man didn't care about any of that. "You don't want to see the other dogs first?" She asked gently. He shook his head. "No, just the one that's been forgotten." There was a pause. Then Lena stood up, grabbed a keyring from a hook on the wall, and said, "Follow me." They walked down a hallway lined with kennels. Dogs barked, wagged their tails, jumped up excitedly. Each kennel had a name tag and a small card listing age, breed, and how long they'd been at the shelter. Some had little stars or hearts drawn by volunteers who'd grown fond of them. They reached the very end of the hallway, an old kennel in the corner, tucked away like an afterthought. Inside lay a large hound mix, his fur dull and patchy. His body was thin but strong. He didn't lift his head. He didn't move at all. "This is Brutus," Lena said quietly. "He's been here almost 2 years. Came in with signs of neglect. People pass him by because he growls sometimes. He doesn't trust people anymore." Brutus kept his eyes on the floor. "We stopped trying to push him for adoption. He's complicated," she added, almost with sadness. The man crouched down slowly in front of the kennel. Still, Brutus didn't move. But then, just for a second, he lifted his head and locked eyes with the man. There was no wag of the tail, no soft whine, no sparkle in his eyes, just silence and pain, years of it resting quietly behind that stare. "I'll take him," the man said without hesitation. Lena raised her eyebrows. "Are you sure? He's not easy." "I'm not looking for easy," he said. "I'm looking for him." They filled out the paperwork in silence. Brutus was brought to the front, and for the first time he stood on a leash outside his kennel. But he didn't walk. He didn't tug. He stood stiff as a statue, his eyes unsure of what was happening. Outside the shelter, the world was buzzing. Cars passing, people chatting, the wind shaking tree branches. Brutus froze. When the man gently tugged the leash, Brutus pulled back. "It's okay," the man said quietly. "Take your time." Bit by bit, step by slow step, they made it to the car. But Brutus refused to get inside. His body trembled at the sight of the open door. The man didn't force him. Instead, he sat down on the pavement beside the car. Minutes passed, then a few more. He just waited. Finally, Brutus crept closer and climbed into the back seat, curling up in the furthest corner, pressed tightly against the door. He didn't lift his head. He didn't make a sound. The drive home was quiet. The man didn't turn on the radio. He didn't speak. He just drove, letting the hum of the tires on the road fill the space between them. His name was Darren. He lived alone in a small house near the edge of town, a place surrounded by trees and soft winds. Peaceful. Quiet. When they arrived, Brutus stepped out of the car slowly, sniffing the air like he was on a different planet. Darren opened the front door and stood back, giving him space. Brutus walked in with cautious steps, head low, ears back. He explored for a moment, then disappeared into the laundry room and lay down in the corner. That's where he stayed. He didn't eat that night, didn't drink, just stared into the shadows. Darren placed a bowl of water and food nearby. Then he sat quietly on the floor just outside the room. He didn't say much, just stayed there, still and patient as the sun dipped and the house fell into darkness. Brutus didn't sleep. Neither did Darren, but for the first time in a very long time, Brutus wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Brutus stayed in the laundry room, curled into the corner like a shadow. He didn't respond to sounds. He didn't move when Darren entered. The food bowl stayed full. The water barely touched. Darren didn't push. He simply kept showing up. Each morning he placed fresh food and water a few feet away. Then he sat on the floor just outside the room, sometimes reading from a book, sometimes saying nothing at all. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, like waves washing the shore. Gentle, patient. On the third day, Brutus blinked at the sound of Darren's voice. That was all. A blink. But it was the first real movement, a small crack in the wall between them. That night, Darren slept on the couch down the hall, the door to the laundry room wide open. He left the hallway light on, just a little. Enough for Brutus to see that he wasn't trapped. By the fifth day, Brutus was beginning to shift, barely noticeable things. His ears would twitch when Darren entered. His head lifted slightly when Darren sat. He still wouldn't eat in front of him, but each morning the bowl was a little emptier. It was on the evening of day 5 that something remarkable happened. Darren was sitting near the doorway, flipping through an old photo album. He wasn't talking, just turning pages. He heard a soft sound, barely a whisper. When he looked up, Brutus was standing. Slowly, nervously, he walked forward. 1 step, then 2. He paused just outside the laundry room and gently pressed his nose against Darren's hand. Not a lick, not a bark, just one brief nudge. Darren didn't move. He didn't reach out. He simply whispered, "Thank you." Brutus turned and walked back to his corner, but that moment, so small it could have been missed, meant everything. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the beginning. The next morning, Darren found Brutus waiting near the laundry room door. He didn't move away as Darren approached. He didn't lower his head. He just watched. Darren walked to the kitchen, glancing over his shoulder. To his surprise, Brutus followed. He didn't come all the way in, just stood at the doorway watching quietly. Darren didn't say a word. He just poured his coffee, made toast, and sat by the window like it was a normal day. Little by little, the pattern continued. On day 7, Brutus stepped into the kitchen and sat, just for a few minutes, while Darren read the newspaper. By the second week, he began to eat while Darren sat nearby. His eyes still darted around and his body stayed tense, but he was no longer hiding. At night, Brutus started lying in the hallway just outside Darren's bedroom. One morning, Darren woke to find Brutus asleep at the foot of his bed. No wagging, tail, no playful jump, just quiet closeness. Darren understood. Joy wasn't here yet, but comfort was peeking in through the cracks. Neighbors began to notice Darren walking Brutus slowly around the yard. The leash always loose, the movements slow and calm. If a car passed or a bird flew too close, Brutus froze. But Darren always waited. No rush. No pull. One afternoon, a young boy on a bicycle rolled by, and Brutus didn't flinch. Darren smiled. "Good job," he said softly. That night, Brutus stepped into the living room for the first time. Darren was watching an old black and white movie. Brutus didn't lie down, but stood at the edge of the rug, his eyes fixed on the screen, ears twitching with each sound. Darren glanced at him and patted the rug. Brutus didn't move. That's okay, Darren said. Take your time. Later that week, a gentle rain fell. Brutus stood by the window, ears up, tail low but not tucked. Darren walked over and sat beside him. Together they watched the drops tap against the glass. It was peaceful. On the 14th night, Darren heard soft footsteps and turned to see Brutus standing beside the couch. Without a sound, he curled up at Darren's feet. Darren didn't move, for hours. He barely breathed. He just sat, letting the warmth of a broken dog rest against him. This wasn't a dramatic change. There were no grand gestures, no movie-like moments, just small, steady steps, but each one mattered. The bond between man and dog was being built not with treats or commands, but with patience, with silence, with respect. Brutus didn't wag his tail much. He didn't lick Darren's face or bring him toys. But he stayed, close now. He followed quietly from room to room. He watched from a distance, always aware, always alert, but no longer afraid. It was these tiny victories that told the real story, and somewhere deep inside Brutus, behind the caution, behind the silence, something was beginning to heal. The sun had barely risen when Darren turned on the TV. A news reporter's voice filled the room, calm but serious. Still no sign of 10-year-old Emily Carson, who went missing 2 days ago after leaving her grandmother's house. Authorities are asking residents to remain alert and report anything unusual? Darren sighed. Emily's photo flashed on the screen, a smiling girl with glasses and a red hoodie. The whole town was searching. Flyers were everywhere. People had formed search groups. Still, no one had found her. Brutus sat near the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. His ears were up, alert. It was different from usual. He didn't seem tense, but focused. Darren noticed. "You okay, buddy?" Brutus didn't look at him. He just stared out like he was listening to something far away. Later that morning, Darren clipped on Brutus's leash and headed out for a short walk. The sky was gray. A storm might be coming. The streets were quieter than usual. Most people were still out searching for Emily. They walked slowly through the park, where the wind picked up fallen leaves and spun them in little circles. Brutus walked close to Darren's side, as always. His tail was steady, his steps calm. Then something changed. Brutus stopped. His ears twitched. His body went still. Darren paused. "What is it?" Suddenly Brutus barked, loud, sharp, over and over. Darren flinched in surprise. Brutus hadn't barked like that since he came home, not even once. "Brutus, hey, easy." But Brutus wouldn't stop. He turned his head and started pulling, not hard, but with purpose, as if saying, "Come on. Now." Unsure, Darren followed. They turned down an alley behind the park. Brutus's nose was working fast. He sniffed the ground, then the air. Another bark. Then he started trotting, not running but not walking either. Darren kept up, holding the leash but giving him room. "Where are you going?" Brutus turned down another street, then cut through someone's backyard. By now, Darren was out of breath. They were far from the park now, heading toward the edge of town. A few people noticed them. "Hey!" Someone called. "That's the dog from the news, right?" "Darren's dog?" Darren nodded quickly. "I think he's trying to tell me something." Brutus barked again and sped up. The leash stretched tight. Darren followed without question. More people joined them. First one, then two more, until a small crowd formed, walking quickly behind Darren and Brutus. Word was spreading. People started calling friends. Brutus led them to the edge of a wooded area near an old road. The ground turned to gravel, then to grass and dirt. In the distance stood a crumbling brick building, long abandoned, half covered by vines. Brutus stopped and barked again. Then he ran forward straight to the building. "Wait!" Darren shouted, but Brutus had already slipped through a gap in the doorway. Everyone hurried after him. The door creaked open. Inside it was dark, damp, and cold. The group pulled out, flashlights and phones. Brutus's bark echoed from deeper inside. They followed the sound down a hallway, through broken doors, past shattered glass. Then they saw her, Emily. She was lying on the ground near a broken staircase. Her red hoodie was torn, her face pale and dirty, but she was breathing. Darren rushed forward and knelt beside her. "She's alive," he called. Someone phoned for help. Others stood back in stunned silence. Brutus sat nearby, eyes on Emily, quiet now. The paramedics arrived quickly. They wrapped Emily in blankets, checked her breathing, and rushed her to the hospital. One of the officers approached Darren. "How did you find her?" Darren looked at Brutus, who sat calmly, tail resting on the floor. "I didn't. He did." Later that day, doctors confirmed Emily would be okay. She had a mild concussion, dehydration, and was cold, but nothing serious. The town was amazed. The mayor made a statement to the local paper. "Brutus, a dog once abandoned and forgotten, has become our town's quiet hero." The next morning, the shelter where Brutus once lived called Darren in tears. "That's the same dog we thought would never find a home," Lena said. "We were wrong." The news spread fast. Headlines popped up online and in print. "Once unwanted, now a hero. Brutus saves missing girl." "Shelter dog leads rescue in amazing twist." From broken to brave, how one dog changed everything. Darren didn't care about the news. He cared about what he saw that day in the abandoned building. Brutus barking, leading, protecting. For the first time, Darren saw not just a scared dog, but a guardian. A leader. That night, back at home, Darren poured a bowl of Brutus's favorite food and sat with him by the fire. Brutus ate calmly, then curled up at Darren's feet. "You did good," Darren whispered. Brutus didn't respond, not with a bark or wag, but he didn't need to. His eyes were no longer full of pain. They were steady, clear, brave. Brutus had never asked to be a hero. He had spent most of his life trying not to be noticed, hiding in the back of kennels, avoiding loud voices, watching the world from the safety of shadows. But now, everyone was watching him. News of Emily's rescue spread quickly. The town couldn't stop talking about the brave dog who had led the search to a forgotten building and saved a young girl's life. Photos of Brutus appeared in newspapers and online. People who had once walked past his shelter kennel now stopped Darren in the street asking, "Is that him? The dog who found Emily?" Darren would nod, smile, and say the same thing every time. "Yes, that's him." Brutus didn't seem to care about the attention. He didn't pose for pictures or bark proudly. He stayed quiet as always, sitting calmly by Darren's side, watching everything with steady eyes. One morning, a letter arrived at Darren's home. It was from the mayor. Inside was an invitation to the town square for a special event honoring the courage and loyalty of Brutus, our unlikely hero. Darren chuckled. "What do you think, buddy? You ready for your big day?" Brutus lifted, his head slightly, and blinked once. That was enough. The town square was filled with people. Children held signs with hand-drawn pictures of Brutus. Families brought their dogs to join in the celebration. Even the shelter staff, including Lena, stood near the front, tears in their eyes. The mayor stepped up to the microphone. "We are here to honor someone who reminded us that love, loyalty, and bravery can come from the most unexpected places. Brutus, once the dog nobody wanted, has shown us all what a second chance can become." He leaned down and gently clipped a small medal to Brutus's collar. The crowd clapped and cheered. Brutus didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. He simply sat, his head held high, calm and steady. But Darren, watching closely, saw something, new in his eyes, peace. After the ceremony, children lined up to pet Brutus. Some were shy, others were excited. One little girl gave him a red ribbon, tying it carefully around his neck. "This is so everyone knows you're special," she whispered. Back home, Darren placed the medal on the mantel, next to a picture of Brutus lying in the sun. He looked over at his companion, who was now curled up by the fire. "You know," Darren said softly, "when I walked into that shelter, I didn't go looking for a hero. I just didn't want anyone to feel forgotten. Brutus, lifted his head slightly and looked at him. "I thought I was saving you," Darren continued, "but I think you saved me too." That night Darren dreamed of long walks through quiet woods, of sun-drenched afternoons, and of Brutus running freely, his body strong, his eyes bright. The next few weeks brought more good things. Emily and her family visited often. Brutus would walk up to her slowly and sit beside her as she told him stories. "You're my protector," she'd say. "My brave dog." The shelter where Brutus had once lived received more adoption requests than they had in years. People asked for the quiet ones, the older dogs, even the ones who had been overlooked. Brutus had inspired something big, something better. One rainy afternoon, Darren and Brutus sat on the front porch listening to the soft patter of water on the roof. The town had settled. Life was back to normal, or at least something like it. But something was different too. Brutus was no longer the scared, silent dog Darren had brought home. He still liked quiet corners and slow walks. He still didn't wag his tail much, but he no longer flinched at sounds. He no longer stared into shadows. He had found his place. Not just in Darren's home, but in his heart, and in the hearts of everyone who now saw him not as broken, but as brave. That night, for the first time, Brutus did something he had never done before. As Darren sat reading by the fireplace, Brutus walked over, gently placed his head in Darren's lap, and let out a long, peaceful sigh. Darren smiled, rested his hand on the dog's head, and whispered, "Welcome home, my friend." And just like that, the story of the unwanted dog found its final chapter, not in a heroic act or a newspaper headline, but in the quiet comfort of knowing he was finally, truly loved. Brutus didn't need applause. He didn't need medals. He had something better. He had a home.